All right, welcome back. We're going to continue reading the book that will forever change your ideas about the Bible, written by Mauro Buglino in 2013. We're about 4 hours into this, and this has been a really, really interesting book. I mean, this completely destroys all the the mistranslations and all the BS that the religious institutions here in the United States, mainly like the Christian and Catholic churches, have been using to control and manipulate people and extort people, and create fear, false fears, and the fear of death that they've instilled on their followers. This has been very eye opening. I mean, I've already known a lot of this because my third eye is open, and when I read the English version of the Bible, I'm like, okay, this is obviously just used to control people, and there's obviously a bunch of references and metaphors to highly advanced technology, extraterrestrials that came here and are just, using it to their advantage. That was very obvious just by reading the English version, but for the people whose pineal glands are still calcified from brushing with too much fluoride toothpaste, if you really, really want to have more confirmation, you can read this book where they tell you exactly how the Bible was first written, which was in Hebrew, and then what the Hebrew words actually meant and how they were translated into English, and then how the English version got all misrepresented. Here it is. All right, this chapter is called The Blessing, and we got the Hebrew word for the blessing right up here in big, giant Hebrew writing, and in parentheses, this is, from what I understand, how it's pronounced in Hebrew. Berakah, Berakahh. We have examined the possible concrete meaning of a specific term, which instead is traditionally assigned a spiritual value, the kivod, and that was the word for the glory of God in the previous chapter, where, again, the kivod was translated into glory of God in the King James Bible, but the word kivod in Hebrew has completely different values and completely different meanings than the way that people in America interpret the word glory of God. In Hebrew, it's more referencing to something of power and something that people were terrified of, something of heavy weight, something of significance, a weapon, a technology. That's how the Hebrew translation is showing it. Not this all-loving, spiritual, etheric God being that's glorious and going to come save you. That's not at all how the Hebrews translated it. All right, let's continue. Such a shift in value has occurred in relation to the term for blessing. Within both Western and Eastern contemporary culture, the concept of the blessings invokes a set of gestures, formulas, or rituals through which one invokes the protection of some supernatural, extraordinary force, such as God, deities, spirits, entities, and/or energies of various kinds. Some examples of conveying blessings are thought to be of laying on of hands, drawing gestures and figures in the air, and the pronunciation of spiritual, magical, or shamanic words containing value or power. Above all, we know very well the most popular and superstitious aspects associated with these practices. In the ancient Semitic culture, there was nothing of this. Before revising the process of one of spiritual orders, the blessing, and in parentheses, again, it's got the Hebrew word barakah, was something real, material, objectively existing, and verifiable. It was a concept expressing concreteness and referring to actions that had direct effects, not magical, over its recipient. Bestowing the blessing was a real task, which produced direct and immediate results. The concrete aspect perfectly matches with the vision we are introducing here of very material, quote-unquote, gods with a lowercase g, creators of flesh and bone just like their creatures. This concept, barakah, is very well documented by various passages in Old Testament, or the Old Testamentary books that tell the story of the Jewish people and their relation with what they call deity. Each time we read of a blessing in the oldest books of the Bible, this is accompanied, preceded, or followed by a sort of explanation. Essentially, it always contains the concrete content. It always explains what the blessing refers to, in which way, and especially for what purpose a person, a territory, an army, or people are blessed. We note that the blessings do not relate to the soul, the spirit of a man, his alleged divine element, or his afterlife. All these concepts are completely absent from the original parts of the Old Testament, which in fact deals with the earthly events of people who had contracted an alliance with an Elohim. Indeed, the blessings were about land productivity, animals' fertility, human labor, women's fertility, or winning a battle. Here are a few examples. In Genesis 1, verse 22, after creating fish and birds, the Elohim blesses the animals to be fruitful, able to multiply, and so to replenish the land and the seas. In Genesis 26, 3 through 4, Isaac decides to leave the country hit by famine and plans to go down to Egypt to seek for food for himself and his people. Yahweh tells him to go there, but to camp in the region that he himself will show him, and promises, I will bless you because I will give you and your offspring all this land. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 2, we find further evidence of this direct and exclusive connection between the blessing and material prosperity. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, the fruit of thy land shall be blessed in your barns and in any undertaking of your hands. God will make you abound in goods as children. Abundant will the breeding of your herds and the young of the flock. God will put your enemies at your feet. The basket and the cupboard will be blessed. You will loan, but won't borrow. Likewise, also, the curse has only material implications: plague, fever, wasting, inflammation, dryness, drought, rust, pallor. In short, concrete is the blessing and concrete is the opposite. There is no spiritual blessing and no curse concerning the soul. Some examples. We will briefly quote some passages as examples, carefully examining the matter of the blessing. Certainly, the most curious and strangest one, and the most difficult to understand if analyzed from the traditional viewpoint, is the blessing given to Isaac to Jacob. The story includes the subsequent disappointment of Esau when he discovers that his father's blessings has expired. How can this be possible if a blessing is a donation of God and a sign of his presence? Let's examine the biblical examples. Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, and the example here is Genesis 48, verse 13. We are at the end of the book of Genesis. The patriarch Jacob is sick, and his son Joseph visits him, bringing two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, or Manasseh. I think it's Manasseh, Manasseh. Besides the joy of having seen even his son's children, Jacob Israel gives them his blessings. The father Joseph puts the two in front of the patriarch in the position he considered correct for the transmission of the birthright, or of the birthright positioning. This is Genesis 48:13. Manasseh on Jacob's right hand and Ephraim on his left. The laying on the right hand conferred those rights on which often depend a person's entire life: properties, herds, land, slaves, wealth, and power. We remind you once again, it was not about the spiritual life of a blessed person. All through the Old Testament, it's all about slavery. One nation or one tribe conquering another, one God and helping one group of people conquer another group of people, and then enslaving them and taking all their land, taking all their belongings. It's a messed up book. There's a lot of death and destruction, and you can see the whole Old Testament. Again, it's like dictatorship, communism, God's laying out these dictatorial kind of laws, controlling people. Contrary to the expected old, Jacob crosses his arms and raises his right hand on Ephraim's head, who was the youngest, and the left on Manasseh's head, who was the oldest son. In parentheses, it says the author of this extract outline, Genesis 48:14, disappointed, Joseph points out the incongruity, takes the right hand of the father and tries to move it onto Manasseh's head, but Jacob confirms his choice and says that Ephraim and his descendants are meant to become greater than Manasseh. I'm trying my best to pronounce these words here. To ensure this, it was necessary that Ephraim could dispose of all that was linked to the right of primogeniture, or in other words, the right of the firstborn to inherit the entire estate. Thus, in examining the precise description of the events details, the crossing of the arms, Joseph's disappointment, his strained attempt to restore the order, let us clearly understand it was not about a spiritual blessing, in parentheses, which could easily be divided between the two without privileging one or the other, but a gesture that in the culture of that time meant the clear assignment of birthright. We can now better understand the importance of this birthright when talking of Jacob and Esau. The spiritual blessing could easily be distributed without any particular spatial position, without a clear distinction between right and left, as it happens every time a priest blesses the congregation that is arranged at random in front of the officiant. In the case of Joseph, instead, the gesture was a real legal act which stated who would become rich and powerful and who would not. And then down here it says in bold, the blessing of the fields. All right, now this is showing this example from the book of Judges, chapter 1, verse 11 through 15. The first chapter of the book of Judges describes some phases of the conquest of the promised land. During what seems to be real council of war, the Israelites ask Yahweh, who among them should move first against the Canaanites. Yahweh indicates Judah as the first fighter, affirming he will be assigned the region he assails. And this is Judges 1:2. We immediately note that despite the promise made by God, again, lowercase g, God, Judah prefers to ask the support of his brother Simon, or Simeon. I think that's Simeon, not Simon. As we have noted with Moses, when the Elohim spoke, there was no absolute certainty. They did what was strategically planned. God's decision was not considered a sufficient guarantee. Indeed, the promise of the Elohim was not enough to complete the conquest because the regions of the plains were under the control of armies equipped with battle chariots, and the blessings of Elohim was not enough to overcome the obstacle. In fact, verse 19 says that Yahweh's help was effective in the mountains terrain because their iron chariots were obviously unable to combat. So God was not able to solve all situations. The chariots of the enemies of Israel exceeded the pure view of his blessings. In fact, let's now return to our topic. Verse 11 tells us a story that helps us shed light on the concept of barakah the way we are intending it. Caleb, the son of Yephun of the tribe of Judah, is preparing to attack a city at Kiriath Sefer and affiances his daughter, and the name here is Ashah. And this is the one who will conquer the city. It says the expedition is won by Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother, who then gets the promised gift. The couple receives as a dowry a territory in the Negev, a well-known desert area that would have been difficult to work and make productive. The two do not lose heart, and the girl, surely a resourceful person, tells her father, "Since I've been assigned the land of Negev, and you will give me sources," and then it's of water, it says. And then over here again we got the translations for "give me a blessing." Thus, the blessing that the girl asks of her father is clearly described. It is not, quote unquote, to speak well, and in parentheses it says, from the etymology of the word bless, and this is the way the Bible translated it from Latin is benedicere, and Greek eulogian, both of which have a basic meaning of to speak well. Also, it's showing us how it starts in Hebrew, and then it gets translated into Latin, and then Greek, and all these other languages, and eventually into English, and it kind of shows like the progression of how the languages, the values of the words change over the different translations from one language to the next to the next. Okay, so we'll read a little again. It says, "It is not a loving comprehension or a caring partnership. It is not about invoking God's help or receiving some sort of magical energy power. The required blessing is unequivocal water to be cultivated in the land." They needed this. Her father then gives him what they ask for. Caleb allowed them to access the upper spring and the nether spring, two sources in the northern and southern ends of the interested land. The blessing, Barakah, is thus granted. The land becomes fertile and they can produce food. Nothing magic, nothing shamanic or spiritual. The blessing is immediately operative because it's concrete. It's water for the dry land. Jacob and Esau is the title of the next section, and this is referencing or using the example of Genesis 27, verse 1. Going back to the story of these brothers, which is one of the best known of the entire Bible, we revisit these two sons of Isaac, twins born at the same time. Esau was delivered first, so he is clearly the firstborn. When Rebekah was about to give birth, we read that, and it's showing Genesis chapter 25, verse 24, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. And now this next part, it says red hair with a question mark. I wonder if this is going to start talking about the giants, the red-haired giants. I'll bet it is. Let's keep going here. Sorry. It is interesting to note that the Bible has felt the need to point out that Esau was red like a hairy mantle. This characteristic, reddish or fulvous hair, returns to the Old Testament, think of the King of David, and is remarked as a non-ordinary fact. We cannot help recalling what was said in the chapter of the Anakims, that's the Nephilim, about the Anunnaki's creation being identified with the name of black heads as if to highlight a difference with another type of hair color. It is certainly strange to think that this phenotype characterized by red hair could be interpreted as the kind of reappearance of characteristics pertaining to the dominant species the Creator's race. Obviously, we have no certain evidence, but the identification of hair color was definitely of significant importance. It is worth repeating here a curiosity about these differences. The the apocryphal book or apocryphal book of Enoch says that the wife of Lamech, Enoch's grandson, gave birth to a child whose appearance, however, was a source of doubt for the father. The skin of the newborn did not have the same color as that of the local natives. It was white and pink. His hair was white, and his very beautiful eyes seemed to emanate light. The Lamech said to his father Methuselah that his wife had given birth to a son who did not look like humans' children, rather the children of quote-unquote angels. That is to say that Lamech suspected that his son had been generated by one of the quote-unquote guardians. Methuselah asked for clarification from Enoch, who reassured him, guaranteeing that the child was Lamech's and had to be named Noah. This particular difference then returns in several parts of the period's literature. Esau was a hunter who loved to live freely in the steppe, while Jacob preferred the tranquility of pastoral life conducted in the family camps. The first was loved by Isaac, whilst the mother Rebekah preferred the second. Chapter 25 tells us that one day Esau returned exhausted and hungry from hunting and asked his brother to have a little stew that he was preparing. Jacob took advantage of the situation and asked Esau to yield him his birthright in exchange for the food. Esau had no hesitation and sold his rights for a piece of bread and a mess of pottage bowl of lentil soup. Hence the famous saying that refers to the yielding of something very important in exchange for a mess of pottage, precisely. That sale was accompanied and ratified by an oath, but evidently this formal act was not enough to make the rights transfer concrete and operational, since they were so crucial to the lives of the individuals and the tribes who depend on them. In fact, when Isaac was old and was about to die, he called his firstborn Esau and asked him to hunt some game and prepare a tasty dish to accompany with joy the official ceremony of his blessings and official investiture. Rebekah, the mother, was determined to secure these rights to her favorite son, so she sent for Jacob, and together they wove a deception. So we ask, what need was there to trick Isaac? If Esau's oath had any legal value, it would simply do by informing the father of his rights, yielding, but apparently things were not so simple. The deception now takes shape. Jacob takes advantage of his brother's absence and replaces him, covering up with a sheepskin in order to simulate Esau's hairiness, and gives to Isaac a meat dish prepared by his mother Rebekah. His father, old and blind, does not notice the replacement and blesses Jacob with the ritual formula containing the object of the blessing: to have the sky dew on the fields, fertility of the land, and abundance of wheat and wine, to exercise power and govern over the people, to be lord and master of his brothers who recognize and honor him. In short, the blessing gave all the material rights relating to property, wealth, and power. They were exclusive in a double sense. First, only the firstborn could enjoy them, and secondly, those rights were only ones resulting from the blessing, in parentheses says barakah, the Hebrew word for blessing. Esau soon discovers the deception, and returning from his hunt, goes to his father in order to receive the long-lasting blessing. When Isaac realizes he has been duped and has given his blessing to the wrong son, he despairs, he trembles violently, and absolves Esau. Now it is obvious to consider that if this had been a spiritual blessing, Isaac had no reason to despair because that kind of blessing is always available to anyone and without limitation. Therefore, it is clear that things were different. Esau then asked the question that sounds incomprehensible to those who believe in the spiritual nature of blessings. We're going into some Hebrew words translated into English. We got this word, it looks like it's astalta, loha, geomeruva. Into English, aside, put, not have you, that maybe, said he, and then there it is again, barakah, the Hebrew word for blessing, and li, me, or for. And then reconstructed into English from Hebrew. And he said, may it be that you have not put aside some blessing for me? Question mark. And so we wonder, how do you put aside a blessing? How do you keep a little blessing for someone? Esau asked these questions because he knew that the blessing was actually available in limited quantities. Indeed, Isaac clearly says to Esau, your brother has come with a trick and has gotten your blessing. And it shows us again here the Hebrew words, mirma bi cha'aki ba, which means trick with your brother, come has. And then it's got cha barakat, which is your blessing, and jika va, which got has and. And so the poor father confirms to have given to his deceiver son everything he owned: power, honor, land, wheat, grapes, servants, ... Very brief conclusion. The biblical blessing is made of material goods and therefore has a well-defined substance. Once given to someone, it is no longer available for others. It was so since the beginning of the story of the people of Israel, who, only after having lost contact with the Elohims, developed a concept of quote-unquote blessing, with quite a different meaning from a donation of material goods to the transmission of spiritual benefits. In other words, we have two completely different meanings for blessing. Here's a further confirmation, albeit indirect, to what we have suggested, taken from the aforementioned text of Archbishop Ravasi. When he defines blessing, he gives a traditional spiritual meaning, of course, but also highlights a very interesting element that the prelate writes, the Hebrew word that donates the blessing, BRK in parentheses, curiously refers to the knee and not much to suggest a bowing of the blessed one, but rather to express the blessing of a person's sexuality. By euphemism, that is extended, that is attenuated. That is an attenuated way to designate a strong reality. The first blessing that the Elohim had given to the man Adam was life. The second was the ability to sexually reproduce in order to populate the earth. It is no coincidence that their sexuality is tied to the original concept of blessing. Indeed, most probably, it has been its first manifest and concrete realization. And the next section, the next chapter, is titled Prophets and the Alien Machines, and it shows us the Hebrew word for that as well, which is spelled and pronunciated in English as Nevim. We're going to stop the video and continue Prophets and the Alien Machines in the next upload.